There are places in this world that carry a weight, an invisible heaviness that clings to the walls, the floors, the air itself. These are places where even the bravest dare not linger, where the shadows stretch longer and the silence presses down like a warning. Welcome to the second layer of the iceberg. Here, we step beyond whispers and legends into the realm of scars. The places and stories that refuse to be forgotten, each one a marker of something deeply wrong. This layer is different. These encounters are not the tales told around campfires. No, these are dark histories etched into walls, buried in police records, and documented by witnesses who saw, heard, and felt things that defy explanation. Here, the lines between nightmare and reality blur, leaving scars on those who dared to come too close. And as we descend, each story seems to reach out, trying to pull us in, daring us to look closer. But before we dive in, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to be the first to know when we drop stories like this one. Done? Now, let's get started. Imagine, if you can, what it would be like to live in a house where you were not alone, not even for a second. Doris Bither didn't have to imagine it. For her, this house in Culver City, California, became a prison of terror. It began as shadows that shouldn't be there, whispers that rose and swam and no hand to close them. Objects would fly across the room. Unseen forces left bruises and scratches on her skin. Paranormal investigators documented it all, but even they were shaken by what they witnessed. Whatever haunted Doris Bither's home wasn't content with simply being seen. It wanted to be felt and feared. And then there's Greyfriars Kirkyard, an ancient, mist-shrouded cemetery in Edinburgh, Scotland. A place meant for rest, but that offers anything but peace. Visitors come to wander its quiet paths, but many leave, marked, carrying bruises, scratches, and a deep, unsettling fear. They speak of an entity known as the Mackenzie poltergeist, a presence so filled with anger, so intent on harming that it lasted for months, a trance that it created a death. Upon the spreading mausoleum, people have fainted, screamed, and run from this place, certain they were being pursued. And even as they left, they knew something was still watching from the shadows. And finally, Borley Rectory, the most haunted house in England. It was once a grand rectory, a home meant to be a sanctuary, but it became a place of shadows and secrets. Apparitions drifted through its hallways, a nun searching for something long lost, footsteps echoing in empty rooms, ghostly writing scrawling itself onto walls as if by invisible hands. Harry Price, one of the most famous paranormal investigators of his time, came to document the strange happenings here. He saw things that even he couldn't explain. And when the rectory burned down, it wasn't an end. The spirits didn't leave. They clung to the ruins, bound to a place they could never escape, as if the very ground itself held them. These are not just stories, they are records of encounters that refuse to fade. Each one left marks. Bruises on bodies, scars on minds, memories that haunt long after the place itself is left behind. These encounters were recorded, documented by those who sought the truth and found only terror. And yet, they are only the beginning. As we go deeper, each layer reveals something darker, something colder, as though each story is a hand reaching out, pulling us further down. This is the second layer, where we begin to lose sight of reason, and reality itself grows thin. Each step we take, each story we tell, brings us closer to the heart of the unknown. So take a deep breath, and let's begin our descent into the darkness. Culver City, California, in the 1970s. Doris Bither was no stranger to hardship. A single mother raising 4 children in a modest home, her life had already been shaped by struggle. Financial instability, a difficult past, and the weight of raising her family alone had left her vulnerable. But in 1974, her already fragile life took a dark, inexplicable turn. At first glance, the house appeared unremarkable, a simple structure tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. But, as Doris would soon learn, appearances can be deceiving. Behind its unassuming facade, something was waiting. Something malevolent. Something that would transform her home into a place of fear and despair. The first signs were subtle. Doris began to notice strange occurrences. Faint footsteps echoing down empty hallways. The quiet creak of doors opening and closing on their own. At times, she would feel a presence watching her, a heavy, suffocating sensation that seemed to follow her from room to room. She brushed it off at first, blaming exhaustion or stress, but the unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. Then the shadows came. Moving shapes at the edges of her vision, fleeting figures that disappeared when she turned to look. It was as though the very house had come alive, its walls whispering secrets meant only for her. Doris tried to ignore the escalating phenomena, but it wasn't long before the strange occurrences took a violent turn. She began waking up with bruises and scratches, marks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Objects in her home began to move on their own, chairs dragged across the floor, cabinets flung open with force. Whatever was in the house wasn't content with merely being noticed. It wanted to be feared. Desperate and terrified, Doris sought help. She reached out to Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor, paranormal researchers known for their work in investigating unexplained phenomena. What they encountered inside her home would leave even them shaken. From the moment they entered, the investigators reported an oppressive atmosphere, a heaviness in the air that seemed to press down on them. Cold spots appeared without warning, chilling the air to an unnatural degree. Lights flickered violently, as though reacting to something unseen. And then there were the sounds. Loud banging, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But it was what they witnessed that truly terrified them. Objects moved without explanation. Chairs sliding across the floor. Doors slamming shut with no one near them. At one point, a glowing orb of light was reportedly seen floating in midair before disappearing into the shadows. It was clear to the investigators that whatever was haunting Doris's home wasn't just a presence, it was an entity, a force capable of influencing the physical world. Despite their findings, the investigators could offer no solution. Doris eventually moved away, leaving the house behind, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Some skeptics have suggested that the haunting was a projection of Doris's troubled psyche, a manifestation of her inner turmoil. But for those who were there, who saw and heard what unfolded in that house, the explanation wasn't so simple. To this day, the entity house remains one of the most well-documented cases of paranormal activity, a place where shadows grew too long, where whispers turned into screams, and where something in the darkness reached out, not just to frighten, but to harm. Was it a spirit? A demon? Or something beyond our understanding? Whatever it was, it left behind a legacy of fear, a chilling reminder of what can happen when we step too close to the unknown. At first, it was small things, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss. Doris would hear faint creaks and footsteps when the house should have been silent. Lights flickered, and objects didn't seem to be where she remembered leaving them. It was the kind of thing most people would write off as forgetfulness or a quirk of an old home. But soon, the occurrences became impossible to ignore. The shadows she saw weren't just tricks of the light. They moved, shifting across her walls, taking on shapes that seemed almost human. She began waking up in the middle of the night, cold sweat drenching her skin, feeling as though someone was standing at the foot of her bed, watching her in the dark. What began as subtle movements soon became deliberate, aggressive. Objects moved on their own, chairs slid across the floor, glasses shattered, and doors slammed with such force they shook the walls. Doris described feeling as though the house itself was alive, watching her, reacting to her, feeding on her fear. Her children, too, began to experience the unexplained. They heard their names whispered from empty rooms, saw doors open and close without reason. One by one, they admitted to feeling as though they were being followed by something unseen, something that moved just beyond their field of vision. And then came the whispers. They were faint at first, indistinct murmurs that could have been mistaken for the wind. But as time passed, the words became clearer, more insistent. They called her name, taunted her, ordered her to leave the house. Doris began to feel as though she was being hunted. The presence wasn't just in her home. It was in her life, invading every moment, every thought. She was no longer safe in her own house, yet she had nowhere else to go. The encounters escalated, each one more terrifying than the last, as if whatever haunted her was growing stronger, feeding on her fear. These were no longer fleeting moments of unease. This was her reality, a relentless, inescapable terror that left her wondering, was she losing her grip on reality, or was something far more dangerous taking hold of her home? For Doris Bither, the line between fear and physical pain blurred in ways that no one could ignore. What began as whispers, shadows, and movements soon transformed into something far more violent. The unseen presence in her home became bolder, and Doris found herself at the center of an escalating nightmare. Bruises and scratches appeared on her body. Marks that she couldn't explain, marks that seemed to grow more frequent and severe with each passing day. At first, she kept the injuries to herself, too frightened to share what was happening. But when her children began noticing, Doris could no longer stay silent. She confided in those closest to her, showing them the bruises and scratches that crisscrossed her arms, legs, and back. The injuries weren't random. They often appeared after moments of intense fear, as if the entity was feeding on her vulnerability. Doris described the sensation as being grabbed, pushed, even struck by something she could not see. These attacks left more than physical scars. Doris's mental and emotional state began to deteriorate. She described feeling constantly watched, as though she were never truly alone. Her fear became suffocating, a constant weight pressing down on her, leaving her exhausted and on edge. But the attacks didn't stop there. Doris reported being physically assaulted by an invisible force. She claimed to feel hands grabbing her, pinning her down, and leaving her powerless to move. It was no longer just a presence. It had become a tormentor, something determined to break her both physically and emotionally. She described these moments with a mixture of terror and disbelief, struggling to explain the unexplainable. The attacks were so severe that Doris feared for her life, and in her desperation, she reached out to those she believed could help: paranormal investigators. Parapsychologist Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor arrived at Doris's home, initially skeptical of her claims. But what they witnessed during their investigation left them deeply unsettled. They documented cold spots, objects moving without explanation, and even faint shadows forming in the corners of her home. During one investigation, the team observed Doris being physically attacked. They described seeing bruises form on her body in real time, as though some invisible force was lashing out at her. It was an experience that shook even the most seasoned investigators. The documentation of these attacks brought attention to Doris's case, but it also left more questions than answers. Skeptics argued that the phenomena were psychological, a manifestation of Doris's troubled past and emotional state. But those who stood in that house, who saw the marks appear, who felt the oppressive weight of the unseen presence, knew there was something else, something far darker. To this day, the physical attacks Doris Bither endured remain one of the most chilling and well-documented accounts in paranormal history. Was it a haunting, a manifestation of something darker, or something beyond our understanding entirely? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear: what happened in that house left scars that could never heal. The story of Doris Bither and the Entity House is not just another haunting tale. It is one of the most thoroughly documented and perplexing cases in paranormal history, a chilling account of fear, violence, and the unknown. For Doris, the house on Braddock Drive became more than just a place to live. It was a prison, a battleground, and a reminder of the fragility of our understanding of the world around us. The evidence collected by Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor, audio tapes, photographs, and first-hand accounts, remains a testament to the strange events that unfolded within those walls. Yet, Even with this documentation, the case defies explanation. The cold spots they recorded, the objects that moved on their own, the bruises that appeared on Doris's body, all point to something extraordinary. But what exactly was it? Many theories have emerged in the years since Doris left the house. Skeptics argue that the events were psychological, a manifestation of trauma and stress from Doris's troubled past. Some point to the chaotic energy in her home, her strained relationship with her children, and her history of emotional struggles as potential explanations. Could her fear have been so intense, so overwhelming, that it created the illusion of a haunting? But others, those who were there, who felt the cold spots, who saw the marks, who heard the whispers, believe otherwise. To them, this was no illusion. It was real, tangible, and terrifying. Was it a spirit tied to the house, a remnant of something long past? Or was it something darker, something predatory, feeding on Doris' entity for decades? But no consensus has been reached. Doris eventually moved away, leaving the entity house behind. But even after her departure, the scars it left on her life and on those who witnessed its horrors remained. The house itself stood silent, a hollow shell of what it once was, as though the entity had vanished with Doris's absence. Yet questions lingered. Was it truly gone, or was it simply waiting for another victim? Subjective nature of the forum, as well, have been known to contribute to suicide, and on those who witnessed its horror remained. The house itself stood silent, afraid to tear oneself off when the life had left it again. Existing out of time, afraid, remained. The neighborhood's whispers never ceased. For years, those who passed by spoke of strange lights in the windows, faint noises that seemed to emanate from empty rooms, and the lingering feeling of being watched. The house became a symbol, not just of Doris's suffering, but of the unanswered questions that haunt all of us. What exists beyond our understanding? What waits in the shadows of the places we call home? To this day, the case of Doris Bither remains one of the most chilling and well-documented paranormal accounts ever recorded. It challenges our understanding of reality, forcing us to confront the possibility that there are forces beyond what we can see or explain. Was it the work of a restless spirit bound to the house? Or was it something far darker? An inhuman entity drawn to Doris's pain and vulnerability, feeding on her fear. Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. The entity house and the horrors that unfolded within it will remain a testament to the mysteries that lurk just beyond our understanding. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things are not the ones we can see, but the ones we can't. To see the rest of the Paranormal series, do subscribe to the channel. In the heart of Edinburgh, Scotland, lies a place where history and the supernatural intertwine. Greyfriars Kirkyard, one of the city's oldest cemeteries, is a hallowed ground that has witnessed centuries of life and death. But Greyfriars is no ordinary burial site. It is a place where the living and the dead seem to coexist in an uneasy truce, where whispers of the past are carried on the wind and shadows move in ways they shouldn't. The Kirkyard's beauty belies its reputation. By day, tourists marvel at its history and Gothic architecture, but as the sun dips below the horizon, Greyfriars transforms. The air grows colder, the mist thickens, and an eerie silence descends. It is in these moments that the graveyard reveals its darker side. For centuries, visitors have reported chilling encounters, ghostly apparitions, phantom touches, and even physical attacks. They say this ground is restless, haunted by the spirits of those who cannot leave. Greyfriars Kirkyard is not just a cemetery, it is a repository of stories, some historical, others shrouded in mystery. Many of its inhabitants were prominent figures of their time, buried with honor and dignity. But for some, death brought no peace. Their restless spirits are said to wander the grounds, tethered to this world by unfinished business or tragic ends. The most infamous among them is the Mackenzie poltergeist, a malevolent force tied to one of the Kirkyard's most notorious residents. Sir George Mackenzie, a 17th century lawyer, earned his grim nickname for his ruthless persecution of the Covenanters, a group of Scottish Presbyterians who resisted religious reform. It is said that Mackenzie's cruelty left a stain on his soul and the land where he was buried. When he died in 1691, he was laid to rest in the Black Mausoleum, a grand yet foreboding structure at the edge of Greyfriars. But his story did not end with his death. For centuries, tales of the Mackenzie poltergeist have terrified locals and tourists alike. Visitors to the Black Mausoleum report feeling an oppressive presence, as though they are being watched. Some speak of sudden chills, unexplained bruises, and scratches appearing on their skin after standing too close to the tomb. Others have fainted outright, overwhelmed by the weight of the energy surrounding them. Even skeptics leave shaken, unable to explain the strange phenomena they've experienced. What makes Greyfriars Kirkyard so unique is not just its chilling encounters, but the fact that these experiences have been documented by hundreds of witnesses over the years. From paranormal investigators to casual tourists, the accounts share eerie similarities: the feeling of being followed, shadowy figures moving in the periphery, and the unshakable sense that something ancient and angry still resides here. Is it the restless spirit of Sir George Mackenzie seeking retribution for his violent past? Or is the Kirkyard itself a beacon for the supernatural, a liminal space where the veil between the living and the dead is paper thin? The answers remain as elusive as the ghosts that haunt this hallowed ground. But for those brave enough to walk its misty paths, one thing is certain: Greyfriars Kirkyard is a place you never forget. In a cemetery filled with the forgotten and the forlorn, one name stands out: the Mackenzie poltergeist. This infamous spirit, tied to Sir George Mackenzie, is said to be one of the most violent paranormal entities ever documented. Its reputation is as fearsome as its actions: scratches, bruises, fainting spells, and an overwhelming sense of dread await those who ventured too close to its domain. The Mackenzie poltergeist is said to be tied to Sir George Mackenzie, the man responsible for the persecution and execution of hundreds of Covenanters during the 17th century. Known as Bloody Mackenzie, his cruelty left a stain on Scottish history, and some believe on the very ground where he now rests. Mackenzie's tomb, the Black Mausoleum, has become the epicenter of some of the Kirkyard's most terrifying activity. The Black Mausoleum has earned a sinister reputation over the years. Visitors who dare to step inside often leave marked, literally. Fresh scratches, bruises, and unexplained burns appear on those who linger too long near the tomb. Many describe feeling as though they are being watched, followed by an unseen presence that grows heavier with each passing moment. Paranormal investigators who have studied the Mackenzie poltergeist describe it as an active and aggressive force. Heat signatures, unexplained noises, and sudden temperature drops have all been recorded near the Black Mausoleum. But it is the physical attacks that have earned this entity its fearsome reputation. In one particularly chilling account, a visitor claimed to feel an invisible hand grab their wrist, twisting it violently until they screamed. Others report being pushed or shoved by an unseen force, leaving them shaken and terrified. What drives the Mackenzie poltergeist's fury? Some believe it is the restless spirit of Sir George Mackenzie himself, bound to the mausoleum by the weight of his atrocities. Others argue that the mausoleum acts as a focal point for darker forces, attracting energies that feed on fear and suffering. The area surrounding the Black Mausoleum, known as the Covenanters' Prison, adds another layer to the mystery. Here, hundreds of prisoners were held under horrific conditions before being executed, their bodies left to rot in mass graves. Could their anguish have awakened something sinister? Whatever the source, the Mackenzie poltergeist stands as one of the most well-documented cases of violent hauntings. Its victims, tourists, investigators, and skeptics alike, carry its marks, both physical and psychological, long after leaving Greyfriars Kirkyard. Is the Mackenzie poltergeist the restless spirit of a tyrant, seeking retribution for the atrocities of his life? Or is it something darker, drawn to the despair and violence of this hallowed ground? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: those who encounter it never forget the experience. And for those who dare to enter the Black Mausoleum, the question remains: will you leave unmarked? Greyfriars Kirkyard has long been a place of eerie beauty and unshakable dread. Over the years, countless visitors have reported strange encounters that defy explanation. From ghostly apparitions gliding silently through the mist, to disembodied voices that call out from the shadows, the stories seem endless and terrifying. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these sightings is their consistency. Witness after witness describes shadowy figures moving between tombstones, only to vanish into thin air. These are not fleeting glimpses, but sustained encounters that leave even the most skeptical shaken. One of the most chilling stories comes from a local man who visited the Kirkyard late one evening, drawn by its haunting reputation. As he walked the narrow paths between the graves, he felt an overwhelming sense of being followed. Turning quickly, he caught sight of a figure. A woman in a flowing dress, her face obscured by a veil. She stood perfectly still, staring at him. But as he approached, she simply faded away, leaving nothing but the stillness of the night. And then, there is the story of the gray figure, an apparition seen darting between tombstones, only to disappear behind the Black Mausoleum. Many have described its shape as unnaturally thin, its movements quick and erratic, like a shadow untethered from its source. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site claim this figure often appears moments before they experience sounds. Visitors also report hearing voices, soft, indistinct murmurs that grow louder as they approach certain areas of the Kirkyard. Some have claimed to hear their names whispered, as though the spirits know exactly who they are. Others describe a sense of pressure, as if unseen hands are pressing down on their shoulders, urging them to leave. And in some cases, the encounters escalate to physical sensations, cold touches on the back of the neck, or the feeling of a hand brushing against their arm when no one is there. One particularly unnerving story involves a group of friends who visited Greyfriars late at night. They claimed to see a figure standing at the far end of the cemetery, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Thinking it was a trick of the light, they dismissed it, until it began to move toward them, slowly at first, then faster. The group fled, but one friend stumbled, feeling an invisible hand grasp their ankle, holding them back. When they finally escaped, they discovered deep bruises on their leg, as if something had truly grabbed them. These are not isolated incidents. The number of documented encounters at Greyfriars Kirkyard continues to grow, with each story adding another layer to the cemetery's haunting reputation. For those who visit, the question is always the same. Are these the restless spirits of the dead, or is something far darker at work in this ancient graveyard? Greyfriars Kirkyard is more than a cemetery. It is a place where the weight of history presses against the present, where the boundary between the living and the dead feels paper thin. For centuries, it has drawn the curious, the brave, and the foolish, each hoping to glimpse the unknown. Many have left with more than they bargained for, scratches, bruises, and scars that never truly fade. And for some, the experiences linger far beyond the Kirkyard's gates, haunting their dreams and thoughts for years to come. What keeps these spirits so restless? Is it the legacy of George Mackenzie, the so-called Bluety Mackenzie, whose violent persecution of the Covenanters left countless souls tormented in life and perhaps in death? Or is it the anguish of those buried in the Covenanters' prison, whose suffering and despair seem etched into the very stones of the Kirkyard? For some, the answer lies in the land itself. The ground of Greyfriars has seen centuries of bloodshed, sorrow, and violence, events that may have left an indelible mark, a resonance that cannot be erased. Others believe the Kirkyard serves as a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds is at its thinnest, allowing spirits to move freely between the realms of the living and the dead. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Greyfriars Kirkyard is not a place to be taken lightly. Its legends, its spirits, and its scars serve as a reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. For those who dare to visit, the question remains, will you leave unmarked? Or will the Kirkyard leave its own mark on you, as it has on so many before? Greyfriars Kirkyard, ancient, haunted, and unyielding, stands as a testament to the mysteries of the unknown. It reminds us that the past is never truly gone, and sometimes the dead refuse to rest. What truly lurks in the shadows of this cemetery may never be fully understood, but for those who seek the answers, the Kirkyard awaits. Enter, if you dare. In the quiet village of Borley, Essex, once stood a house unlike any other, Borley Rectory. Built in 1862 for Reverend Henry Bull and his family, the rectory was intended to be a peaceful residence, a sanctuary for a man of faith. But from the moment the family moved in, the house seemed anything but holy. Described as a Gothic manor with an aura of foreboding, Borley Rectory soon became the subject of whispers and rumors. Locals spoke of strange lights flickering in its windows, shadowy figures moving through its corridors, and an oppressive air that seemed to cling to anyone who entered its walls. By the early 20th century, the house had earned a grim title, the most haunted house in England. The stories began with whispers of a tragic past. Locals told tales of a nun who fell in love with a monk from a nearby monastery. When their forbidden love was discovered, the monk was executed and the nun was bricked up alive within the monastery walls. They say her restless spirit wandered the grounds of Borley Rectory, searching for her lost love, her sorrow forever etched into the land. But the Bull family experienced more than just a legend. They reported hearing unexplained footsteps, whispers in empty rooms, and the chilling sound of a servant bell ringing when no one was near. Reverend Bull himself claimed to have seen the ghostly nun wandering the rectory grounds at dusk. To him, she became a familiar presence, though no less unnerving. After Reverend Bull's death, the activity intensified. When his son, Harry Bull, inherited the rectory, the hauntings escalated. Witnesses spoke of mysterious voices, objects flying across rooms, and cold spots so severe they left frost on the walls. But it was not until the 1920s, when Reverend Eric Smith and his wife moved in, that Borley Rectory's haunted reputation became national news. Reverend Smith and his wife were overwhelmed by the phenomena. They heard disembodied voices calling their names, saw ghostly figures gliding through rooms, and witnessed written messages appearing on the walls, seemingly scrawled by invisible hands. Desperate for answers, the couple contacted the Daily Mirror, hoping to document the strange events. What followed was a series of investigations that only deepened the mystery. Paranormal phenomena were witnessed firsthand by journalists and researchers, including Harry Price, one of Britain's most famous ghost hunters. Price described Borley Rectory as a hotbed of supernatural activity, a place where the veil between the living and the dead seemed paper thin. Borley Rectory was more than just a house. It was a stage for the unexplained. Over the years, residents and visitors alike reported seeing ghostly apparitions, hearing disembodied voices, and witnessing strange, unearthly phenomena. Among the most famous sightings was the figure of a nun, her translucent form drifting silently through the garden and hallways. Witnesses described her as sorrowful, her head bowed as though in mourning. She became a fixture of Borley lore, believed to be the spirit of the nun who fell in love with a monk centuries earlier, a love that led to her untimely death. But the nun was not the only spirit said to haunt Borley Rectory. Residents also reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the halls, their shapes indistinct but unmistakably human. One account describes a tall man in a long black coat standing silently at the foot of a bed, vanishing the moment a light was turned on. Others spoke of hearing heavy footsteps pacing the upper floors late at night, even when the house was empty. Perhaps the most unnerving phenomenon witnessed at Borley was the ghostly writing that appeared on the walls. Messages scrawled in childlike handwriting seemed to plead for help. Phrases like, "Marianne, please help," and "Don't go," would appear suddenly, as if written by unseen hands. The messages were often directed at Marianne Foister, the wife of Reverend Lionel Foister, who lived in the Rectory in the 1930s. Marianne herself reported strange occurrences, her belongings disappearing, objects being thrown across the room, and the sensation of being touched by invisible hands. Harry Price, Britain's leading paranormal investigator at the time, was fascinated by the phenomena. During his visits, he and his team documented everything from unexplained lights to objects moving on their own. Price described Borley Rectory as a place of psychic energy, where the boundary between the living and the dead seemed unnervingly thin. He even claimed to have witnessed the ghostly writing appear in real time, as though an invisible hand was moving across the walls. The phenomena were not confined to the rectory's walls. Visitors and locals alike reported seeing strange lights in the windows at night, long after the house had been vacated. Some claimed the lights moved from room to room, as though carried by unseen hands. Others spoke of a chilling presence that seemed to linger in the air, an unshakable feeling that they were not alone. By the late 1920s, Borley Rectory had gained notoriety as a place of unrelenting paranormal activity, drawing the attention of Britain's foremost ghost hunter, Harry Price. An experienced investigator known for his scientific approach to the supernatural, Price arrived at the Rectory armed with an array of equipment designed to detect and document the unexplained. Over the course of several investigations, he would uncover phenomena that defied logic and cement the Rectory's reputation as the most haunted house in England. Price's investigations began with reports of ghostly apparitions and mysterious sounds. Residents described hearing heavy footsteps echoing through empty hallways, doors slamming shut on their own, and faint whispers calling their names. To document these occurrences, Price stationed himself and his team throughout the house, each equipped with devices to capture evidence of the supernatural. During one investigation, Price and his team witnessed objects moving, seemingly of their own accord. A candlestick was flung across the room with no apparent force, narrowly missing one of the investigators. In another instance, they reported hearing a loud metallic bang emanating from the rectory's kitchen. When they arrived to investigate, they found no one there, but a heavy pan lay on the floor as though it had been thrown from the counter. But it wasn't just objects that moved. Price documented unexplained temperature drops, describing rooms that became unnaturally cold within seconds. He also recorded faint voices, indistinct murmurs that seemed to rise and fall, as though a conversation was taking place in another room. In one chilling account, Price described seeing a shadowy figure standing at the end of a hallway. When he approached, it vanished into the wall. Perhaps the most infamous aspect of Price's investigation was the ghostly writing on the walls. Price described watching as the words, "Help me," and "Marianne, please come," appeared in real time, as though written by an invisible hand. These messages seemed to beg for assistance, but their origin remained a mystery. Price was convinced that the writing was a form of communication from the spirits trapped within the rectory, but Price concluded it was a hoax. Price's findings captured the public's imagination, turning Borley Rectory into a national sensation. Newspapers printed his accounts, and crowds gathered near the house, hoping for a glimpse of the paranormal. But Price's investigations also sparked controversy. Critics accused him of exaggerating the phenomena, or even fabricating evidence to bolster his reputation. Yet, for those who experienced Borley's hauntings firsthand, there was no doubt something unexplainable was happening within those walls. Harry Price's investigations remain some of the most detailed accounts of paranormal activity ever recorded. Though the rectory itself was destroyed by fire in 1939, its legacy lives on. The questions Price sought to answer about life after death, the existence of spirits, and the boundaries of the unknown remain unanswered. But one thing is certain: Borley Rectory left its mark on all who entered, and its stories continue to haunt the imagination to this day. By 1939, Borley Rectory had endured decades of hauntings, investigations, and public fascination. Its reputation as the most haunted house in England had drawn crowds and skeptics alike, each hoping to witness the unexplainable. But in February of that year, the rectory's story took a tragic and mysterious turn. A devastating fire swept through the building, reducing it to little more than ash and ruin. The cause of the fire was never definitively determined. Some blamed an overturned oil lamp, while others whispered that it was the work of the spirits themselves, angry at the intrusion of so many outsiders. Paranormal investigators who returned to the site after the fire reported feeling an even greater intensity in the atmosphere, as though the destruction of the rectory had only heightened the energy lingering there. Despite the fire, the hauntings did not cease. Visitors to the site continued to report strange lights moving across the ruins, shadowy figures emerging from the mist, and the faint sound of footsteps on the now empty grounds. Some claimed to see the ghostly nun wandering through the rubble, her sorrowful figure still searching for peace. Others spoke of a sense of overwhelming dread, as though the spirits of Borley had been left unmoored, their ties to the physical world stronger than ever. Even today, Borley Rectory's legacy endures. It remains one of the most famous haunted locations in the world, its story a chilling reminder of the mysteries we may never fully understand. Was Borley Rectory cursed from the start, its walls destined to hold the echoes of tragedy? Or was it the spirits of its restless inhabitants, unable to leave even after the house itself was gone? Borley Rectory may be gone, but its story is far from over. The ruins stand as a testament to the unknown, a place where the veil between the living and the dead feels dangerously thin. For those who dare to visit, one question remains: are the spirits of Borley at rest? Or are they still waiting for someone to hear their cries? For centuries, Humans have tried to explain the unexplainable, to put words to the things that go bump in the night, to rationalize what logic refuses to accept. In the cases we've explored so far, the evidence is haunting, the experience is undeniable. And yet, we've only just scratched the surface. Above the waterline are the stories we tell, the legends that gain attention, like Borley Rectory, Greyfriars Kirkyard, and the Entity House. These are chilling, yes, but they are the first layer, the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them lies something far darker, stories more difficult to explain, and encounters that will test even the strongest skeptics' resolve. As we descend into the next layer of the paranormal iceberg, we leave behind the stories that are whispered and begin uncovering those that are screamed in terror. These encounters are not just about haunted places or restless spirits. They challenge our perception of reality itself, pulling us deeper into a world where answers are elusive and the questions grow louder. What lies beneath? What waits in the deepest layers of this chilling iceberg? Are these the remnants of lives gone wrong? Echoes of past tragedies? Or something far more ancient and malevolent? We are about to go deeper than ever before. The cases that await us are not for the faint of heart. They are the stories that linger long after the lights go out, that make you question whether you're truly alone in the dark. Subscribe to the channel to stay with us as we descend further into the unknown. Liked this video so far? Then like and share so that others can get to enjoy it as well. The journey ahead will be terrifying, but for those brave enough to follow, the truth may lie just beneath the surface.